Hey, we got nothing but time. The longer we screw around, the better the chance that Tony decides he wants to pop in. No, just kidding.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I can hear you too.
Ooh, and you sound much better now, Evan.
Really? All right, I just poured myself more beverage, so I'm
Awesome.
set.
All right.
I'll have to speak up and speak more clearly, I guess, since I won't be picked up.
Lean into the microphone.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Oh, you sound really sexy there.
Yeah. Well, that's because I'm right up on the ball.
Gotta hit it and crit. We won't stop, we won't quit till we hit it and crit. Gotta hit it and crit.
10,
Gotta hit it
9,
and crit.
8,
We won't stop, we
7,
won't quit.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 7th episode of ATSFE on the Rocks, the more or less irregularly but almost monthly podcast for ATS things. This is one of your hosts, Mitch, and tonight I have with me Evan.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing?
There we go. Unfortunately, Tony couldn't join us tonight. I'm sure it's because he was on his War Room YouTube thing earlier today, and the boss probably put the kibosh on two things in one day. So whatever, we'll see. But how you doing, Evan?
I'm doing lovely. How are you?
I am lovely as well. Survived Thanksgiving, thankfully.
You survived giving blood, and
I did. I made a little bit of a miscalculation on the day after Thanksgiving, giving blood and forgetting to eat lunch and drinking with a bunch of friends and passing out around 6. So
It's just like the good old days.
yeah. But we were celebrating. My youngest recently got engaged, so
Oh wow! Congratulations.
we were partying with her.
Nice.
Her prospective in-laws, I guess. Our prospective. I don't know, what is that relationship. I don't even know, but whatever. So that was cool. I'm happy for her, and we're still kind of celebrating.
Of course. Yeah. Well, Mitch, just to be clear, you'll be the father-in-law, your prospective.
Right. Well, of him. Oh, well, I meant I'm the father-in-law of the groom, right? And I get that. But what's the relationship to the other parents? Is there a word for that? Is there a term for that? I don't know.
Man. This is
right.
This gets me all the time.
That's my question.
And there's this comes up too in learning other languages. I remember studying Latin and always being I didn't know the terms in English. What is a cousin set twice removed? I didn't know. I don't know what that is. So how am I going to possibly understand that in another language?
Mm-hmm. Second cousin first once removed. What?
So strange.
It's can't you just be cousins and be done?
Yeah, but then everyone's your cousin.
Well, which is a problem, right? So
awkward. Well, Annie has a thing where, it's a normal Latin thing to call, Latino thing to call, everyone tío or tía, aunt or uncle, especially someone,
right?
Yeah, kids in the street. I'm old enough now that kids in the street will call me that.
Oh wow.
Sure. Yeah, I know. It's a sign. Annie will insist on calling anyone to our kids oh yeah, that's your Tío Harrison, and I'm that's not her uncle, that's her cousin. Just because he's a lot older doesn't make that it's
uncle.
Uncle. Yeah,
let's get it right.
There's an actual it's different whether it's okay. It's one thing to call friends who are older. Okay, you call them
sure.
But when there's an actual blood relationship that's not aunt or uncle, you probably shouldn't say aunt or uncle.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we always did that. The friends of the family who would come over. Oh, this is your aunt so-buddy and your uncle so-and-so. Not that there's zero blood relation, right?
Right. But it also gets confusing when you have aunts who are named real blood aunts who are named the same name as other friends who are also known. But are not actually.
Well, it's kind of
this has been a great ATS podcast. I'm glad.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's kind of like G Watts and C Watts and ATS. Are they kissing cousins or are they aunt and uncle, whatever?
Well, that's actually going to come up, I think, today talking about
yeah. Well, so this is the ATSFE on the Rocks podcast, and so we have to have our cocktail moment. So, Evan, what are you drinking?
Well, I'm going real boring today. I'm just drinking Jameson neat, and that's it. I know people seem to love or hate Jameson, but I'm kind of okay. Sometimes it's nice.
It's
But
okay.
I'm not like, I'm not like it's great, but I don't hate it.
I like it as a mixer. I don't necessarily like it neat, but you know.
Well, I had an incident, so here I can at least tell a cocktail story, even if I'm not drinking it currently. I I was like, oh yeah, I'll make an old fashioned with scotch the other day. Ooh, that did not end well. That was
No.
pretty bad. I guess I didn't
No.
understand what makes an old fashioned with why you use bourbon. So yeah, and I'm a little scared actually to make cocktails with non like that I don't
Right.
understand. It's
Right.
whiskey, but
The
it's
flavor
not.
profiles, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, because I get trouble all the time because one of my go-to drinks is a Rob Roy, and I get the look from the bartender every single time. What the hell is a Rob Roy? I'm like, well, it's a
What?
Manhattan made
Really?
of scotch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, it's an
that's exactly why I thought this would work. I was like, oh yeah, okay. So
right.
I like Manhattans, and you can make them with scotch, and it's a Rob Roy. So I was like, okay,
Right.
I like old fashions. They're made with bourbon. You could probably make them with scotch, but turns out you cannot.
You cannot. Maybe it's the sweet. I don't know.
Maybe it was the scotch I used too.
Oh, that could be too, right? I mean, because not every scotch is made for mixing, and
Well, this
that good
this was not a top shelf scotch that needed to be drank on its own.
There you go.
But anyways, what are you drinking?
So, given the topic that we want to kind of dive into and take on this podcast, and then for the next month or so, not to tease it, but I looked long and hard for a nautical South Pacific cocktail, and it's all over the place. Finally, I just settled on a salty dog. But as we all know, I don't really like non-alcoholic stuff in my cocktails. So it's supposed to be a quarter cup of gin and 3/8 of a cup of grapefruit juice, which I really find funny that they specify the recipe in cups, not ounces. But
oh, jeez. Well,
yeah, I know.
Have like a pitcher and serve it to the party.
Exactly, and that's probably what it is, right? But so anyway, what I did instead was I used the quarter cup of the gin. I used my cask, my Pinckney Bend cask finished gin that I love, and then I just replaced the grapefruit juice with Deep Eddy grapefruit vodka. So there you go. Get the grapefruit, but a little bit extra kick. So I don't recommend more than like 2.
A little extra. I mean, so you're drinking gin and vodka mixed together?
Yeah, it's flavored vodka, so it's different.
Yes, but I don't think the flavor reduces the alcohol. I mean, maybe actually.
No,
is it like, what is it? Is it still 40% or is it like 30 or 30?
I didn't look at the bottle, but I'm sure it's still 35 to 40%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Better be careful.
Right. Well, that's why it's over ice. It'll be sipped, not guzzled. Right.
That reminds me of the Vesper. I used to make those, which I've been planning.
Yeah.
I want to make another one so this is actually not totally tangential. I was going to drink for Pacific Month. I was going to either make a sake-based cocktail or just drink sake by itself. And we do have a bottle in the fridge, but we've been watching the James Bond movies in order, and then
nice,
accompanying them with appropriate beverages, mostly cocktails. But the next one up is You Only Live Twice, which is like the Japanese one, and the only drink basically they drink is sake. So I'm gonna have to save it for that.
Nice.
But yeah, so I want to make a Vesper, and I used to make them many years ago. And at that moment, that was when Casino Royale had just come out, or had been out relatively not too long ago. And so you could find Lillet Blanc, just like even in Panama, they had it. And they had it for a long time, too. I thought maybe it'd just be like, okay, one batch, and then they'll stop bringing it. But they kept bringing it. So I was like, oh, yeah, it'll just be here. It'll be a fixture. And now I looked everywhere, and I'm like, oh, God, it's gone. And you're also supposed to use overproof vodka to kind of, like, that's the original drink would have had that formulation, but then the ingredients changed later. And I used to be able to find overproof vodka, and I can't find a single bottle. Like it might just be a thing. Like it might be, I don't know, illegal to sell it here or something.
Oh wow!
So we'll see what happens.
All right.
I got a ways to go before Casino Royale, so I have time to
time to hunt it down or figure something else out.
Yeah, order it illegally.
Right.
And have it shipped. Don't tell anyone. Anyway,
so any other than the board of play we had last night, which we can talk about later, I guess, but been playing in the ATS? And if so, what?
I have, actually. I've been playing with Jeff, who's...
Oh, yeah.
I think he's new. Well, yeah, I know he's new to ATS.
Mm-hmm.
so we got in a brief session. We're supposed to play again. We played Against All Odds, which was my first module. So that was pretty cool.
Well, it's a good one to get into.
Yeah, well, it is. Although I kind of felt bad because I mean, you immediately have to deal with orchards, which
Good thing there's an article on that.
Yeah, exactly. At least we're clear on them now. But also just multi-level lines of sight, and it's
right.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to avoid completely because unless you play, on a flat map with pretty
the brook. Right.
Yeah, I guess that makes it.
Well, and I think doesn't it have a bunch of bocage up on the?
It does.
Upper right of the. Well, I mean, depending on your orientation on the map, but I'm going to call it upper right of the map.
Yeah, it is a good amount of bocage. It has. I mean, there's one scenario that has no vehicles, but every other, but it's small. It still has a mortar. It still has the terrain and issues,
right?
And then all the other ones actually have vehicles and an off-port artillery for the most part. So,
nice.
So sorry, Jeff. That was, but I mean, we had a good time.
Yeah,
we blew up a bunch of my tanks.
Perfect. Well, apparently you made him a convert because I think that's the same Jeff who just said, "Hey, I bought the 4.0 rules and the Stalingrad game." So,
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah,
yay.
No, we had a good time. I mean, it's good too. I mean, he was quick. He could just jump in and be like, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah, this is what you got to do." He's clearly an old hand at wargaming. So.
Right.
What about you? Been playing any ATS?
Sadly, no, I have not. I've been doing other stuff other than the game that you and I played, and we need to reschedule. But I haven't, and I need to get back to it because it's just so good. But
well, that was the thing too, because I after the tournament, I kind of I had it on the solo for so long, and I just had that. I did play a little bit, but not very much, and I just had it set up for forever, and I wasn't really doing it. I was like, all right, it's time to admit defeat and just put it away for a little while. But then when I went to play with Jeff, I was like, oh man, this is great. I miss this.
Exactly. Well, yeah, Tony and I tried to pick up our game back up, and then he got busy and I got busy, and it just kind of died, and we'll get back to it eventually, but I need to start making it a priority. It's like a lot of things. If you make it almost like a scheduled thing, it'll happen more often than not, right? So maybe he and I just need to get together or whatever, somebody, and say, hey, you know what? Every third Saturday this is happening, ATS day or whatever. So that would be better. But we've done a lot of talking about ATS, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's not like we've been distant from. There's no production behind the scenes. Yeah, and speaking of talking about ATS, I know one of the things we were going to talk about was the GWATs, or the Great War ATS. For those of you listeners who don't know, we have a Discord. We don't have a Discord channel. There is an ATS Discord channel of which we are participants in moving things along on there as well. But on there is a GWATs, or Great War ATS channel, and Mark has been doing. He wrote the article on ATSFE on the blog about GWATs, which got rave reviews and several more comments than some other articles. But anyway, he has been playing a bunch of GWATs and doing a lot of scenario stuff, and just talking in general about the not just the particular scenario, but about the rules and how they work together and all that. And I mean, it's like a master's class on GWATs. I've found them quite good reading myself. I mean, I hate to admit this, but I think Mark is probably more consistent in putting up GWATs content than ATSFE is in putting up. Well, it's his passion. He loves it. So
yeah. Well, I mean,
kudos to him, right?
Eventually he put this out there, but I mean, he's a pretty big expert on the. I don't think that's what he does professionally, but he knows quite a bit about World War One, far more so than most people. So he has a unique perspective.
Yep, which is fine. I'll leave it right. I'll leave him to it.
It's great because he can say, "Oh, well, yeah, this is historical. This seems a little iffy," or and with some, it's not like. People like to complain on the internet and say, well, I read this one time in one book, but they don't have that kind of background of a strong base of knowledge. But he does.
Yeah. So, I mean, if any of you have an interest in GWATs or how well does ATS transfer to World War One, then I highly suggest reading the article that Mark published on the ATSFE blog, but then also hit us up, find the Discord invite, get over there to that channel and just read. I mean, there's days and days worth of content you can read. So
yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because speaking of how well ATS transfers to the First World War, I mean, and speaking of people complaining on the internet, would not anyone present, we wouldn't be
we would never do such a thing.
Never do such a thing.
Wait,
but he seems to think it's pretty. I mean, it transfers pretty well. Maybe not perfectly, but he seems to think it's better than anything else out there for
right.
World War I tactical combat. So,
yep.
Even if it seems a little bit, if it would seem iffy, it seems in practice it works out. So,
right.
Cool.
Well, yeah, and that's my thing. I personally I don't sound bad. I don't care either way. Right? I have no interest in it. I'm glad he's happy with it and he likes it and it seems to work well. But I just World War I's not my thing. I probably would like it if I played it, but I just have other things to do. So
there's a lot of systems and games and periods out there.
Right. Exactly.
This is the one area of my life in which I've actually sort of specialized and don't try and do it all. Like I don't own a single game I think the earliest game I own is the Russo-Japanese War, and and as I've kind of continued in my wargaming path, I don't play any really very much that's just World War II, but post World War II is my main
right.
thing. There's so many World War II games out there that are good that it's hard to avoid.
Exactly. Well, I mean, it's a major topic, right?
It is.
So anyway, so speaking of GWATs and CWATs and ATS and major topics, I don't know if anybody caught the one of the things we want to talk about was the mention in the mailer about the new set of rules that are supposed to come out next year, and there was some confusion as to how they was going to come out, and so I pinged Ray on it. How was he thinking of putting them out? In other words, were they going to come out as a single book with everything? So you buy the rules, period. You get ATS, and then you get a GWATs chapter and a CWATs chapter. At least that's the way I understood him to be talking about it. Of here are either the changes to the main rules. So if movement is different or whatever is different, it'll be in the GWATs chapter, right? Or if it's just an add-on it's not part of regular ATS, it only applies to GWATs. It'd be in that GWATs chapter. Or was he going to say, here's the ATS rules, here's the GWATs rules, here's the CWATs rules, and you can buy them separately, right? So, but we had a little bit of a poll, and most people wanted, I think, the whole kit and caboodle is one thing, but
well, that was my initial reaction, but then the conversation continued, and now I'm not so sure. It really depends so much on what it actually means to have chapters. Because if it's
exactly.
like ASL, I do not want a chapter I don't want to buy helicopter rules for Vietnam. I don't want to have to buy, like, if there's rules for the Japanese, I don't want to have to buy a bunch of stuff, like make these micro decisions about is this worth buying or not. And then generally it's going to be more expensive that way.
Right.
But if it's those sorts of breakdowns, ASL style, then I would not want chapters. I'd want the whole thing. However, if it's not that way, I don't necessarily want GWATs. I'm definitely interested in CWATs, not so much. So, and again, it all depends on the price points. If it's like $10 extra, sure, I'd be happy just to have
whatever.
It. Just cause, yeah, exactly. It's not a big deal, and I'm curious enough just from a general standpoint of this is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's $50, it's more or whatever.
Right.
That's no good, no bueno.
Right. I mean, if the next set of rules come out and it's everything in one rule book and it's $150. You know what? 4.x is just fine for me.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's what happened to a lot of people, I think, after 3x. Because 3x was, free still, or you could get it with modules or whatever.
Right.
And then I guess, we talked about this with Scott. And at the time, I was like, come on, people, just what's your problem? But that's in retrospect, of course. Now, looking at it, I'm like, well, if I was not paying for the rules and then I had to pay for the rules, I probably would I would just stick with
right.
the old edition.
Yep. So,
But
That's the big ATS controversy right now. Is how are the are the rules ever actually going to come out? But then B, how is he going to deliver them? Which whatever.
yes,
I think I saw somebody post somewhere today, and I don't remember where. He was asking if the 3.0. Oh, it was on the War Room. So I was watching Tony and his cronies, Jester and Ruff, talk on the War Room, and some guy was on there and said, "Hey, Tony, I live in Europe, and all I have is the 3.09 rules and a couple modules." He didn't say which ones. He's like, "Is it fine to learn that way?" And of course, the answer is yes. The 3.09 rules or 3.x rules, whatever you want to call them, are just fine.
yeah,
I mean, the big major changes, column shifts became dyro modifiers in a lot of different cases. There are some other smaller changes, but that's the biggest one, in my opinion. But
this is an article at some point.
right.
For sure. Because I didn't realize how many people played 3.x. I remember one of the early articles, I think it was grabbing some houses scenario analysis. And someone had commented on Facebook, what edition are you using? I was like, what? Why would I feel the need to include that information?
Right.
Like, I just assumed that I played 3.x for probably a year or more.
Mm-hmm.
And I just assumed I was a backwards roughneck playing the old edition. Yeah. But I mean, as if it's any indication, I played the tournament. I think that was probably the second time I played 4X rules. Was my first tournament game.
Mm-hmm.
I did fine in the tournament. So I guess it didn't make too big of a difference.
No. Yeah, I mean, and Scott talked about that too back in one of our earlier episodes. If you check it out, is that it was mostly a rules cleanup, and yes, there were some changes, but
right,
a lot of it was just cleanup and stuff like that. So
yeah, and again, I mean, I can understand if you played 3.x for a long time and you were kind of on the fence anyways. Maybe you wouldn't want to pay for a rules cleanup. I mean, there are some other big differences that do affect the game, like the strategy, and I think the game balance of previous modules that were balanced using earlier rule sets. But as we've talked about previously, I'm not sure how much that kind of thing is.
Well, and not even just earlier rule sets, but misunderstandings based on the rules, right?
Orchards.
Yeah, exactly. This had orchards, and nobody played them right, and then it got clarified incorrectly, and then scenarios were built on that, and then
oh god, I have a hard time looking at old scenarios with that have a lot to do with orchards and being like, is this? How did they play this? Because it's such a big difference.
And not to again throw back to one of our earlier podcasts, but that was the interview with Devin where he was talking about how they tried to balance it, and at the end of the day, it's just it feels balanced. You can't tell because there's so many micro decisions within the scope of a game, including not just die rolls, but just the micro decisions. I went left instead of right, or whatever. Right. That it's kind of hard to get that feel for it, right? Almost have to play every scenario like Tony and I were doing for a while 3 times, right? Swap sides, and then you bid to play a side on the last side. Or the last
you guys
time.
used to play scenarios 3 times to get the.
Well, we would play them twice because we weren't, it wasn't like a tournament setting. But at the end of the day, we'd like, okay, if we were to play it a 3rd time, I'd want to play these guys because I think they have a better chance to win or whatever, right? So.
Yeah, that would be a fantastic way to do it if it weren't so time.
Right, if it just didn't take so damn long.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you could do it. You'd have to. It'd be a year-long tournament, right? I mean,
right.
You're like, okay, you have 1 month to play this scenario.
You'd have to have people who were committed to doing that, who really wanted.
Correct. Because I mean, even in the last tournament, you could see people were falling off as it went longer and longer and longer, and that's part of the problem, right?
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think this tournament, in spite of being a tournament, was a bit more casual, which is good because it was more relaxed, more fun. Yeah.
Right. For first go and all that good stuff.
Yeah. But for a tournament where you're playing 3 times, you got to get people really, really on board. Right. I think playing more, having a better sense of the scenarios too. I mean, this is by no stretch of criticism, but you looked at the old data that for the win-loss records for old scenarios and went through that and be like, okay, you have to have at least enough plays of these scenarios. And then I think that was a great way to do it because you weren't going to sit down and go through your look through 500 scenarios to figure out which were going to be the best ones.
Right.
But yeah, I think as we get more and more experience, and as more tournaments happen, and we have a better idea, these scenarios get played more, we'll have a better sense of like, okay, these are the balance scenarios, and as those scenarios get played more, they can be whatever balanced.
Right. Well, and I think that's why it's important to get people to post their win-loss records, of, hey, we played this scenario, and then the Axis won by 20, whatever it was. So you get that sense of, okay, that's fine. At least it's a data point. You get enough data points, and you can make a kind of decision. And I mean, players are different, and some players are stronger, and some players are not. But at least if a scenario had 30 plays, you could be reasonably confident about which side has a better chance to win.
Right. With 30 plays, I get a little bit nervous about people, not so much people playing well or not, but people playing by the rules.
Well, that's different, right? But
yeah. It's not, because I like the orchard thing is a perfect example.
Yep. Yeah.
Which came up in Against All Odds, and maybe look back. It was very interesting. I actually did that recently with, spoiler alert, this is non-ATS wargaming conversation. I did that with Reluctant Enemies, because that was, like my second war game that I played. And then I played a lot of other OCS and bigger campaign games, and went back to play Reluctant Enemies to kind of suss it out and see, because a lot of people complain about it. They're like, "Oh yeah, that's not real OCS," and yes, it is. So, anyways, it's the same kind of thing. It was interesting to go back, play Against All Odds, my very first ATS experience, and then going back and playing it as tons more experience under my belt.
Right, as a much more experienced player.
Yeah, it looks very different.
Right. No, I get it. Well, that's why we're introducing a new chapter into your ATS play now.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think maybe we move on. We talk about the main reason we wanted to get this podcast going tonight, even without Tony, sad face, right?
Big sad face.
Was to introduce Pacific Month. So for the next, and Tony spilled the beans. When was that the last podcast we did? I think it was. It was something we were doing together.
I think everyone forgot though, because no one's mentioned.
Well, that's right.
Where's the Pacific?
That was a while ago.
Yeah,
that was a while ago. So for the month of December, for obvious reasons, right? We're going to do Pacific Month. So everything we post, and we're going to post a ton of content. We got a bunch of stuff lined up around the Pacific theater. And so here we just kind of wanted to talk about Pacific stuff in general and that kind of thing. So I know you had a pretty specific question.
I did, but first I actually had a different question. So have you played, other than the ridiculous game that we played the other night, have you played any Pacific ATS?
I have. So my buddy Johan and I have played the Palelu model, White Beach 1, Beach.
Nice.
I think it's White Beach 1. Anyway, we played that.
First
it was good. It's interesting because the Japanese get this big ass mortar, and I was rolling really well and decimated the Marines before they even made it to the beach. So then we decided to reset and start over, and I didn't roll so well that time. But he actually got, men on the beach, which was good. But yeah,
the perfect example of of it being difficult to balance.
Right. Yep. And then prior to that, we had played, I think, one of the Blood and Iron scenarios. It wasn't the one we played. It was one of the other ones. I just can't remember which one it was. But it's not a whole lot of Pacific stuff, unless you count Vietnam, which isn't really. I mean, it's the Pacific, but not World War II Pacific.
I guess it is on the Pacific.
But technically, it's jungle stuff. But
I don't think that's
other than that, no.
When they say Pacific.
Yeah, no, not really. But
interesting.
So I'm actually kind of looking forward to playing a few more. And I know you had said something about taking a deep dive in there too.
I feel like it's time. I'm not super interested in the operational or strategic aspects of the Pacific War, but definitely in the technical part I am. But I just haven't. It's just one of the many things on the gaming to-do list.
Well, now you're going to get the chance. So that begs the question of which Pacific modules do you own?
I only own two, I think. I own Blood and Iron and Semper Fi. No, it's got some generic title.
Yeah.
It's the one. It's the one on Tarawa taking the airfield. It's always taking an airfield, but it's another.
Well, it's always about taking an airfield.
Yeah,
right?
it's another.
It probably might be Semper Fi, but
I think it is Semper Fi. I'll look it up.
Yeah.
Look it up on BGG.
Okay.
So, which do you own?
Well, so obviously I have the Pelelu White Beach one. I have Bloody Buna, which is massive. You're going to see the battlefield walk around for that. I have Wake Island, which you'll also see a battlefield walk around on. I also have Blood and Iron, which I think you did a battlefield walk around on.
I did. I love that map. That's a really
cool
map.
Oh yeah, I have the Philippines one. I cannot.
Oh wow.
Road to Bataan. Not Road to Bataan. I don't even remember what it's called now, but I haven't played it, but I really want to. It's the early, 1941, 1942, early war Americans. It looks pretty cool.
Yeah, and on VATS, they're the early war Marines who are not nearly so badass. And I was very curious which module they were in. So maybe that's the one.
Yeah, I don't remember honestly. What else do I have? Wake Island. I almost had Kohima. What?
Oh well, that I didn't even know. I didn't know that was a thing. When you guys started talking about it on Discord, I was like, oh, all right, that seems like that's going to be on the to buy list someday. Yeah,
that'll be my next to buy. I think it just looks fascinating, and I have the OCS Burma game, which covers Kohima and Mayat Kina, whatever it is, or Imphal. Sorry, from obviously a much larger scale, but I think the Kohima. ATS module would be pretty cool. Plus, the map looks pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, so this is Semper Fi, the Uncommon Valor upgrade.
That's what it was. The Uncommon Valor upgrade. Yeah.
So the big question is, which I find confusing, and I think you're going to explain this to me at least a little bit. But why the Pacific War, and ATS in particular, but in general,
right? Right. And I remember you asking me earlier on, and I said, we need to wait. And I know it kind of came out of two. So I had recently gone to see John C. McManus talk. He's got St. Louis connections. He's a historian. He's written many, many, many books. All of them very good. I highly recommend, read them all. I haven't read them all, but the ones that I have read are very good. Where this comes in here is last year, or I guess it was 2 years ago, he came and he talked about his first book on the Pacific, which was Fire and Fortitude, which is the story of the U.S. Army in the Pacific, 41 to 43. And he just came again. Not even a month ago, and talked about his latest book, which is Island Infernos, which is the 1944 U.S. Army in the Pacific. And then it's a trilogy, so he's going to put one together for 45. But in response to, so he talked about this at the library talk, but I figured I'd just read it. It's out of his prologue, and it kind of speaks directly to that question, right? So he starts with Cole Kingseed once argued persuasively that 5 factors contributed to the greater prominence of the Army's war in Europe over the Pacific. The Germany First strategy that dictated Allied priority of resources, and thus the entire course of World War II. That's the first one. The second one is the maritime nature of the Pacific struggle, leading historians to a naval-dominated narrative. That's number 2. Number 3 is the cult of personality surrounding General Douglas MacArthur, who, by his own design, absorbed almost all accolades to himself rather than to soldiers who did the real fighting. Number 4 is unbalanced press coverage by correspondents who found Europe a far easier and more hospitable place from which to report than the wilds of the Pacific.
Yeah.
And number 5, the troubling racial savagery that characterized the war from start to finish. And then he goes on, the chaotic and tragic debacles of multiple early Allied defeats have undoubtedly also contributed to this obscurity. After all, Americans never suffered any defeat at the hands of the Germans to equate with the Japanese conquest of the Philippines in 1942. Moreover, the brutal, unfettered manner in which both sides fought the Pacific Asia War hardly lends itself to a popular good versus evil narrative. Though unquestionably the United States attempted to adhere to some semblance of humane work making far more than did its adversary. One of the other things he talked about is the problem with the Pacific War was, and this was during the talk, is that they had embedded reporters just like the guys in Europe. The problem was they're on the wrong side of the international date line, and B, the distances were so vast that you could get a report from Europe just way faster than you could get one from the Pacific, right? From the Pacific, they might literally have to come on a ship as opposed to over the radio or something like that.
Right.
So,
But that's then now. But now, I guess that's trickled down to now.
right.
The whole. Well, and all those reasons.
Yeah, right. Well, and it's funny because he specifically set out to write about the Army in the Pacific. It's not the Marines, right? He's like, the Marines had, I think he said 5 divisions, and the Army had, 20 something. More landings were made by the U.S. Army than the U.S. Marines. The U.S. Marines just had better PR, right?
I mean, the Marines always have good PR,
right? And he was talking about, I forget which landing it was. Iwo or Okinawa, or maybe it was even Peleliu, but it was larger in terms of ships and men and aircraft than D-Day.
Right.
And several of the other ones were almost as big as D-Day, and they did it over and over and over and over. But you don't hear about that, right? All you hear, well, D-Day and blah, 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 that. Well, yeah, but
it's sexier. It's sexier.
Right, exactly. So,
well,
anyway.
To add from a wargaming perspective, and this is just how I see it. I have no data to back this up. I didn't do any surveys. That I think it's easier for people to put themselves in the shoes of the Germans, or mostly the Germans. Honestly, people have an obsession with the Germans, even if they don't realize that they do.
Right.
I find it incredibly odd and kind of irritating how we refer to the German army as the Wehrmacht, and we call them Panzers. It's when I refer to French tanks, I don't say les chars. I say the French tanks over there,
right, the French armor, the French tanks.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, but
exactly.
And I think a really, speaking of American defeats, I find it very interesting that one of the, there's the games that are, or battles or wars that are much more gamed than others. And D-Day being a prime example, but another one is the Battle of Catherine Pass, which is
right.
An American defeat and not the American Army's finest hour. So why is that so popular? Okay, yeah, you could say it's Americans' first time fighting the Germans, but really it's the sexiness of German panzers, and this is their last major thrust.
Well, and it was a big swirling. It was a tank battle, and tanks are cool, right? All that kind of stuff. And it's funny because he even John McManus talked about that. Is people don't think that tanks weren't used in the Pacific. He's like, they were used all the time. You just don't hear about it. I mean, not in the same right. There was no Kursk in the Pacific,
right?
They had tanks. They used them. He said it was just. Basically, he said it boiled down. It was just a bloody, brutal war that nobody really wanted to hear about.
Yeah. And I think people can be like, "Oh yeah, I either want to play the Germans or I want to play the Americans or Commonwealth, whatever."
Right.
But there's a lot less of that. I want to play the Americans or I want to play the Japanese, which whatever. It's the way it is. I want to play the Japanese. They're really good.
They are. Right. We should talk about some of that.
Yeah.
Because we talked about, so I know you're penning a couple of different articles, but I know that the Japanese are just, it reminds me of the super fins that came in Mannerheim's Cross that then got nerfed in whatever the newer module was, Winter War or whatever.
I looked at the old fins and VATS.
Oh yeah.
My jaw was on the floor. I was like, really?
10-10-10. I mean, I'm making it up, but it might as well have been, right?
Yeah, it was like 10-3-9 or 10-4-9.
Yeah, they were just amazingly tough. But
and Ray Tapio, Tapio's not a Finnish surname by any stretch of the imagination.
No, so who knows where that happened, but. Yeah.
Odd.
Yep. But I mean, the Japanese are very, very tenacious for sure, which I find funny. I mean, I've done a little bit of, not a ton of reading on the war in the Pacific. And tactically speaking, they were not very inventive. They were not, I mean, they had shitty equipment. You know, their light machine gun was crap. Their heavy machine gun was a little bit better, but not great, right? For the most part, their equipment was just junk. And they had basically what they had going for them was Bushido, you know, the whole esprit de corps thing, and they had huge morale. But at the end of the day, it came down to they would fight to the last man and they would charge you. But tactically speaking, a frontal charge isn't really the greatest thing to do in front of modern weaponry. But, you know.
Well, I think so. I guess we'll just jump right to it.
Yep, let's go.
And those are some of the observations I made in one article about the Japanese, about how to play them and how to take advantage of their awesome leaders of morale as they're you know, the hard numbers aren't so great in terms of their you know, gunfire factors and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Which I think is good, right? I mean, that reflects the crappy nature of their equipment, right?
Right. And I think, and that's another issue, is the bonsai charge, which we'll talk about that in an article. But for my, you know, I barely dipped my toe into this subject, but I've listened to Dan Carlin's, you know, I've listened to like a gazillion hours of in the East, and my 2-minute review of the Wikipedia article on bonsai charges don't seem like they actually that effective. Certainly not as effective as they are in ATS rules wise.
Right.
But it makes sense because it's a design for effect sort of way of representing them.
If such a thing exists.
Right. If you don't make them effective, then what's the point?
Correct.
One. And two, more importantly, perhaps, by making them effective, it puts the American player in the shoes of the Americans. It makes it much scarier and more and puts them in makes them make the same sort of decisions. Like, okay, can I move these guys here if they're by themselves and not close to enough to another of their friends? Because if you just do it from a stats perspective, and ATS, of course, is a very like stats oriented game. It's not
right.
Okay, yeah, there's no. Obviously, the morale system is a big part of it, but there's not like tons of other squishy soft factors to take that sort of thing into account, like command and control and that kind of thing. So I do actually think that the bonsai charge works from that perspective. It's not like a 1-to-1 historical. This is what was actually happening, but it gets the right message across to the American of like, okay, you have to be careful. These, you know, fanatically more extremely high morale troops can mess you up at any moment if you're not careful.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, it puts you in the right tactical frame of mind, which is the whole point, right?
Right. Exactly. And this is an article that maybe someday I'll write. I don't feel qualified to write it, but about ATS, and I think ASL too, has this weird relationship with realism, where half the and Canadian Jeff, one of the Canadian Jeffs, said it well. He kind of pointed me in this direction, where it's like it has a hard time deciding whether it wants to be like super serious or like super cinematic, like a movie.
Right.
Exactly.
And
you can see that with the bonsai charges, like they're, or like versus like the tanks. Okay, we're looking at the specific penetration values of these tanks in real life based on real life data of all these tests done and ballistically. And then you have courage, or you have Japanese bonsai charges being, crazy.
Human wave attacks.
Yeah, human wave attacks. Right. Yeah, all this like crazy stuff. Yeah, it's pretty funny. So, but anyways, that's okay. Topic for another day. But I think bonsai charges is right there with that.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I mean, they just have a lot of special rules. And, one of the other things that really has always intrigued me about the Pacific is the terrain. I mean, not just jungle, but there's bamboo. As we found out in our scenario, bamboo, which is just like jungle. an elephant grass and just this swamp and just different kinds of terrain that really, really restricts what you can do and restricts visibility. And I mean, you're on top of somebody before you can do something to them, and which then lends itself well to the whole bonsai thing. And, you know, tactically speaking, how do you, well, right. Depends. Right. Well, I mean, in that particular instance, when I had a company's worth of dudes all standing right there, you know,
it did not work well.
The morale boost was it was intense. So,
but not having completely open terrain, you know, you wouldn't do a bonsai charge in North Africa. That would not even
right. Well, you'd get cut down on the way in, right? Well, you'd have to time it right. That's the thing, you know.
Yeah.
And so I think going back to the earlier point is it encourages really good tactics of bounding Overwatch. Okay, well, you're moving up, but these two guys they're staying on Overwatch because if he's going to bonsai charge that stack, he's going to get torn up by these machine guns, right?
Yeah.
So.
And this going back to why the Pacific Theater isn't as popular. I mean, in ATS, I feel like no one has ever said this to me, so this is just completely me pulling shit out of my ass, which, you know, normal.
It's what I told Tony we do.
Yeah,
we just sit around for an hour talking out of our ass, and then we publish it.
Come on, this is the age of the internet. You can
That's right.
know nothing about a subject, but you pull shit out of your ass and put it on the post-it, and there, man,
you bet.
People are all over it like flies. But I suspect there's at least a degree to which people are off-put or scared of the rules because there's more. I mean, you know, ATS it's not ASL, but it's not a rules-like game either.
Right.
And so I think there's some of that, like, oh god, I have to read about the Japanese and how do they work again? What's a bonsai charge and what's a tank hunter do? But the rules, there's really not that many rules. Once you read through them, you're like, oh, okay, that's it.
Right.
And then okay, we had to look up the bonsai charge to make sure we were doing some specific things right, and if we had tank, we didn't have any tanks, so we had to look up the tank kind of rules. But again, we'll have some articles, we'll have some
Well, I think it's like a lot of the other things. You look it up, so and not unlike ASL or any other tech, you look it up because you're encountering it for the first time or whatever. Yeah, you read the rule, but you don't really remember it, so you need to look it up and reread it, just make sure you're doing it right. But then after that, okay, I've done it 5 times. I understand how this works.
Right, exactly.
You know, so if you stay in the Pacific for a while, it'll become second nature and old hat, just like all the other stuff.
Exactly.
You know, the terrain, it's different, but the terrain effects. Now, I mean, in the video we'll post, there's a very long discussion on how bamboo works, but at the end of the day, you just apply all the principles that you understand. And really, I think we spent more time going around and around just trying to, you know, make sure that
we're talking about the same thing.
Right, exactly, than anything else. It's not that hard.
No.
Right. Well, you know, most of that was due to, I think, to the hex spine issue, right? That's the part was lower, and what's whole hex terrain really mean? But, you know, to get the full flavor of that, you'll have to wait, listeners, until we post that video, which thankfully is only the highlight video. So
yeah, that was not necessary to see, as you will see, not necessary to see the entire video.
Right, the whole play. We'll do a better one next time. But
yeah, no, it was good though. It was fun. It was a good. It's actually an excellent lesson. I mean, not to me because I already have learned this lesson long ago. I'm the chief proponent of this lesson, which is why it's horribly ironic and hilarious. Right. Yes, you should read the battlefield walk around very closely.
Correct.
Before you play.
Always. Yeah. Well, and I felt your pain. You're like, I thought that was brush because the bamboo depiction looks just like brush.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but it was good. I saw it fun.
Yep.
Cool.
So I think maybe we'll close out and talk about favorite stuff.
Favorite stuff.
You think?
Oh, right.
Favorite books on the subject. So we were kind of banding around earlier. What do we want to talk about? I'm like, well, you know, favorite books, favorite movies. What are you going to do to get into the mood? And Evan already mentioned the favorite podcast was Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. If you have not heard of it and you want to listen to it,
I don't know what's wrong with you.
B, take a week off.
Right.
Find your favorite beverage.
take a long car ride, really long car ride.
Yeah, each episode's like 4 hours long, and I think he's
Yeah.
up to 6 episodes. So I mean, it's not for the faint of heart, but he goes into every detail you ever want to know about the Pacific War. So it's Supernova in the East is what it's called, and it is excellent.
It's
just
good
very
stuff.
long.
It'll get you in the mood for sure to play Pacific.
Correct.
Stuff. And there's bonus content on Hardcore History Addendum. There's is
there? I didn't notice
at least one interview that has to do with the Pacific still.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
cool. So, favorite books. What are your favorite books on the Pacific War, Evan?
I mean, do I have any? I think I bought one from someone, another wargamer, but I don't have it right yet, and I'm not sure I've read any Pacific books. I know I'm a horrible person. Here I am beating the drum of the Pacific, and I'm the worst. Mitch, back me up here. What do you got?
All right, so books that I have read: Ghost Soldiers by Hampton Sides. And it's actually going to tie into to a movie as well, but it's about the raid on Cabanatuan in the Philippines. So after the landings in the Philippines, and they learned about a prisoner of war camp that was deep in, and they organized this raid to go get them. The book is fantastic. So Hampton Sides he's an excellent writer. He wrote what the hell did he write? I'm sitting here looking at my shelf. He wrote another book, which is good. Oh, On Desperate Ground, which is about the Frozen Chosen in the Korean War.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic book. So that same kind of writing he applied to this one. It's very easy read, very good read. Another one would be Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. That's the story of Louis, I don't know how you pronounce his name, but Zamperini, who was a track star, but he was a Liberator pilot. He got shot down, prisoner of war camp. They made a movie about it. I never actually saw the movie. The book was very good, though. But I recommend that one. And then, of course, With the Old Breach, Eugene Sledge, and A Helmet for My Pillow, all very good books. And then we already mentioned John C. McGinnis. I haven't read his books yet, Fire and Fortitude and Island Infernos, but I guarantee you that they're going to be good because he's just that good of a writer. So.
Good stuff. Yeah, the E.B. Sledge book was on my list for sure after listening to the Dan Carlin podcast.
Oh yeah, they're that and Helmet for My Pillow are both very good. And there's probably hundreds of others. If I just look at my shelf, there's No Bended Knee, which is Guadalcanal, and the Ambrose the Pacific book. I didn't like the TV version, but.
I watched a couple episodes, but I never ended up finishing it for whatever reason.
Well, I mean, I think it suffered by comparison with Band of Brothers, right? And the problem with the Pacific was it wasn't the same group of guys. They just kept jumping around, which like the book jumps around, right? So the book is much easier to follow. But if you're trying to watch the TV show, you're like, well, what happened to that dude? Because I wanted to hear,
Yeah, people want that kind of thing,
right?
Which. Okay, you don't have to follow everyone's subplot, for 16 modern TV shows, but I can understand maintaining at least some semblance of consistency of characters. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me of what we said about the guy of the track star. So this is Pacific, very tangential.
Right.
Does it happen in Vietnam? So there's I have to bring CrossFit up apparently. So in CrossFit, there are hero workouts. So they're like these crazy, ridiculous workouts that are memorizing veterans who have died in service, and firefighters, police officers, that kind of thing. So there's one from CrossFit football that's for one of the very few professional football players to fight in the Vietnam War. I think Bob Kalsu, but the workout's called Kalsu, and it's like an epically difficult workout. I've never even attempted it because I'm like, I'm not going to finish this. So, but yeah, Vietnam. Well, that's a topic for another podcast in the not too far flung future.
Right.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, but yeah, favorite movies and TV shows.
Go. What do you got?
Well, I guess I got nothing because I started the Pacific and didn't finish, and then I started the Clint Eastwood directed movie Flags of Our Fathers,
Oh yeah,
and for some reason again didn't finish it. I guess I'm the worst at finishing things.
that's funny. Yeah, so my favorite movie, obviously, there's Bridge Over the River Kwai, which totally fictional, but
Right, I've watched that.
but it's a fantastic movie, right? And it gives you some sense of it. So that, and The Great Raid is the movie that goes with the Ghost Soldiers book. The movie itself is pretty good. They try to make a love story out of it, so they change some of the history, and it's okay. But if you read the book first and then watch the movie, you'll understand and appreciate the movie better, and then you can just hand wave the other bullshit that they put in there about the because it's not really how it happened, but they had to. It's Hollywood; they had to make some kind of angle in there, right? But,
right. I mean, standard operating procedure is to read the
but overall, the movie is pretty good, and I think Benjamin Bratt, is the lead on that one. Anyway, I thought it was pretty good. Other than that, To End All Wars I thought was a pretty good movie. It's about POWs during their time in the camp. Kiefer Sutherland's in that one. Is pretty good. And then Empire of the Sun was also very good. That has I think that has Christian Bale in it. But that was also very good. It's like a story of a boy who grows up under the occupation of the Japanese.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And then TV shows. I mean, how can you not like Baba Black Sheep?
What? I'm not familiar with Baba Black Sheep.
Baba Black Sheep? Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you got to look it up. So it was the story of a Marine squadron in the Pacific, and they got into all kinds of shenanigans, right? I'm trying to remember the name of the lead character or the lead actor. Yeah, what was his name? He was the Energizer guy. Like you had to knock the battery off his shoulder. Robert Conrad. He played Pappy Boynton as the commanding officer of the Marine Squadron. All the misfit guys. I mean, they just get up into all these shenanigans, but it was really cool. Mostly because you got to see them fly, the F4Fs or F4Us and
nice.
Do all kinds of stuff. But it was just a good TV show, I thought.
Robert Conrad, W.K. Stratton, Simon Oakland, Dana Elcar, James Whitmore. Well, I'm trying to name the one you're looking for. I don't know if I did.
I thought it was Robert Conrad. Robert Conrad he's the Energizer dude.
Okay, there you go.
Pretty sure. He was also in the Wild Wild West.
I mean, I saw the Will Smith movie, which is
not the same.
Not the same.
Not the same.
Not the same.
Yeah, don't watch that one.
Yeah.
If you can find reruns of Baba Black Sheep, you'll be happy.
Okay, yeah, I'll check it out.
Yeah,
what was there was another movie that was very recent maybe not that recent, but something called something like Endurance. I'm sure that movie title has been used before, so it probably wasn't called that, but about some British prisoners of war. And going back to the athlete theme, there's a guy who was supposed to run in the Olympics and for Britain, and then World War II happened, so he didn't. And then he was a prisoner, and of course was destroyed. And then he ended up running the Olympics in 2004 or whatever it was, many years later. Not competitively, but just they had him there. But yeah, it was a movie, and it wasn't that long ago.
Right,
and a guy stranded on a life raft, and then they get rescued, but by the Japanese.
Right. Well, I mean that sounds a lot like The Unbroken, because that's what he was. He was an Olympic runner.
Right.
Shot down to B-24. So he was on a life raft for 20-something days. Rescued by the Japanese. Did some time in the camps, and then finally was rescued. So that could be the same one, but he wasn't English. He was American.
Oh, maybe I'm just have a poor memory. I didn't actually watch this movie either. So
there you go. Well, now you have some things to go track down.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. Hey, and I thought about all the, the John Wayne, Gung Ho, and, Tora. He wasn't in that, but Sands of Iwo Jima and all that. And they were okay movies, but I wouldn't call them favorites. They were more propaganda than anything else, which is fine.
Right.
But they're okay. Hacksaw Ridge was pretty good. I don't know if you saw that one.
Oh, I did. I couldn't do it. I mean,
Yeah, it was such a slow roll, right? I mean,
it was so I don't know. It was so like this is what people think. Like this is what people think like a hardcore gruesome war movie should be.
right.
I'm like, no. Just because there's blood and like people dying horribly doesn't make it like a realistic gruesome war movie. Like that's not
right.
like the guy picking up the other guy, you know, who's got his like he's dead and his legs are like blown off or whatever. And he picks him up with his rock on and like is carrying him in one arm and then like using it as a human shield and then shooting his BAR with the other arm. Like I just I couldn't.
Yeah.
There was too much stuff like that or like the father coming in and the father was ex-military or whatever and fought in World War One, and he comes into like into the courtroom where like the son's being not court-martialed but whatever the legal process is to like go and like speak on behalf of his son, not having to fight.
Right.
It was just,
which I mean, you know, it was all based on a true story, which is fine. But,
right.
Yeah.
And maybe that happened. I don't know, but it just seemed
Right.
pretty ridiculous and contrived.
Yep.
But if you liked Hacksaw Ridge, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I didn't. It was okay, right? I mean, it was, you know, good action scenes. Let's not talk about Wind Talkers.
I've never seen Wind Talkers, but it has Nick Cage.
Yeah, you didn't miss much. Unless you just like bad Nicolas Cage movies.
I'm sure it was great because Nick Cage is Nick Cage.
Right. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Let's make a movie about the Navajo Wind Talkers, and then let's focus it on the white dude.
Right. Classic.
Exactly.
He's relatable.
Right. Yeah.
Well, except that he's Nick Cage, so maybe he's not.
Right.
Relatable.
Yeah. Exactly.
How eccentric are you?
Yeah.
Anyways,
so, and that's the thing. I mean, there's probably tons of books and movies to choose from. Those are just the ones I happen to know about. I'm sure if Tony were here, he'd have a dozen more to add, but he's not here, so too bad.
Yeah, he ruined it because I'm useless on this topic. Clearly.
That's right.
But
I think that's all I got. How about you? Any last words?
I mean, I'm excited to play more Pacific Theater ATS for sure.
Yep. Exactly. More Pacific
redemption.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely give that scenario another go.
So imbalanced.
Yeah. But I'm excited about it, and hopefully listeners are excited about Pacific Month. Obviously, December 7th, Day of Infamy. We had kind of talked about it. It kind of said, "Oh yeah, we'll just do something special on that day or that week," and let's just make it a whole month. So we'll do that, and hopefully there'll be lots of good content. I
think we're writing some Pacific injustices. We're trying to balance out the it's 1/12 of the year. It's not a 50% of the year, but still it's better. Yeah, better balance.
Yeah, and there's a ton of modules to go play. So go buy some, go play some. Don't be scared.
Great advice.
Yep. All right. I think if there's nothing else, I guess that's it. That was the 7th episode of ATSFE on the Rocks. Hope you enjoyed it.